Хорошо. Да, да.
Раз, два, три. Раз, два, три.
Good afternoon, dear friends, dear guests of the event. I'm very glad that there is such a representative turnout of the students, and there are a few faculty members as well to participate in this roundtable discussion, which is in fact at the same time a book launch by our long-standing friend, Guy Mettan. I've had the pleasure of moderating twice his meetings with our faculty and students in the past. Last time he came, it was the presentation of his other book on Russophobia, which elicited a lot of response and interest on the part of the students and the faculty members. And later on, I was quite pleased to find it on several syllabi of the courses delivered here at MGIMO, as well as in our library, which shows that it has actually found a very wide readership in our country. And it's quite natural that upon learning that Guy was going to present yet another book that has just penned, I was thrilled at the opportunity of organizing this event with all of you. And in the same breath, I must admit that it wouldn't have been possible without the energy of the Students' Club that is very instrumental in organizing it. And Nicholas, present here as well, thanks to his energy and enthusiasm, we've been able to put it all together rather efficiently and on a very short notice. Just before we begin and we open it up, I would like, first of all, to introduce myself. I'm Andrey Baykov, Vice-Rector in charge of Research Affairs here at MGIMO. And of course, I would like to give you a brief introduction of Guy, even though all of you, I'm pretty sure, who's chosen to be here, know pretty much about him. So Guy Mettan is a Swiss journalist, politician, and the founder of the Geneva Press Club. He was a director and editor-in-chief of Tribune de Genève and president of the Swiss-Russian Joint Chambers of Commerce. Guy Mettan currently serves as deputy of the Grand Council of Geneva and was its former president. He's written several books about Russia and is holder of the Order of Friendship for his contribution to Russian and Swiss relations. We've decided together with him to structure this event in the following fashion. We'll start it off by him presenting the gist of the book. He will talk for about 10 up to 15, 20 minutes. And then we'll open it up for roundtable discussion, and I would invite the representatives of the faculty as well as students to propose their questions, comments, and opinions. So we are looking at somewhere about 1 hour and 15 minutes all together for the event to complete. It'll be followed then by a coffee break and a discussion in a more informal setting straight afterwards. So I end with this, and I'm giving the floor to Guy. Thank you again for being with us.
So thank you. So good afternoon to everybody of you. I'm very happy and proud to be here for the second time. And I would like to thank Andrey Baykov for his support and the support of the organization, the students, and also Nikolai Ramsayer, a friend of mine, good friend of mine, who helped to organize this meeting today. So I am especially happy because As Andrey told you, it's the pre-launch of my new book. It's Sardaryan Continent. It has yet been published. It will be published next year in 2002, but we have pre-launched this week at Biblioglobus because the book has been printed just, it is still warm because it is just out of the print since a few days. So why this title? Why this title? So the lost continent. The lost continent, in my view, is European continent. Why Europe is lost in my vision of the destiny of the fate of Europe, for many reasons. What I tried to do is to explain the problems the European integration, the European Union is facing now, examining the historical undergrounds, the historical examples we can have. So I started to work with the former essays, the former tentatives of European unions, and all these tentatives collapsed. There were only failure. There was six. It's the seventh tentative, the European Union. The first one, after the Roman Empire, was the Charlemagne, Charles the Great, Karl Veliki. Yes, in Russian. It collapsed because it was the first emperor in the 9th century. His empire lasted only 40 years, and after that it collapsed. The second one was the so-called Roman Holy, German Roman Holy Empire. It started at the 10th century, a little bit the same time as Russia was created by Vladimir. So at 9th century, this empire lasted 8 centuries, but it collapsed too. Another tentative was Napoleon. Napoleon tried to unify Europe, but it also collapsed, as you know. Russia is especially aware of that. Another trial was Stalin, was Hitler. Hitler, he tried also to unify the continent. It was also a collapse. And the communist times with Stalin, they tried also in a certain way, we can say. It was partly successful in Eastern Europe, but it also collapsed in 1991. And now we have the seventh tentative with the European Union. And for me, this tentative is pretty successful, but not successful enough to succeed. I made another comparison with the former Greece. If you know the Greek history of old Greece, not actual, not contemporary Greece. If you look the history of ancient Greece at the time of Pericles is okay? Pericles, yeah. So 5th century before Jesus Christ. There was also a tentative of unification, but it collapsed because there was a big war, the Peloponnesian War, which divided the Greece between two camps. You have Spartan with its allies, and you have Athens with its allies. And this war lasted 30 years, from 432 until to 404 before Christ, so 28 years. And after that, Greece tried to unify, but the Greece was so divided it could not succeed. It's exactly what happened in Europe. Europe has had a war, a civil war, which lasted 30 years between 1914 until to 1945. It's exactly 41 years. A war like in Greece in two phases, one First World War, second step, Second World War. But after that, Europe was so divided and the civilization was so broken that Europe tries to face that, to tackle with this problem with this European Union, saying never such a war, civil war, we will try to cooperate. Exactly what did the former Greece? They tried to make leagues between the city-states of Greece. But they did not succeed because they were too much divided. The former Greek integration was stronger than actual contemporary European integration because they had a joint army, which is not the case in Europe now. So, and a common currency and also common institutions, but it didn't collapse because there were too many tensions inside, and every time there was a tension, a camp or a part of some Greek states, they called foreigners to get in the conflict. And so they called once the Romans, Rome, they called them once in second or third century before Christ. They called Romans second time, and they called in second century, it was 180 years, 80 before Jesus Christ, and they called a third time in 142. And they called the Romans, but the third time the Romans came to help a Greek side against the other one, what happened? The Romans never left Greece. And Greece was completely vassalized by the Roman Empire. And it was the end of independent Greece and the end of the high level of civilization. Greece didn't disappear, but it was the end of this very big philosophy, culture, civilization, because it was absorbed by the Romans. And exactly what happened in Europe. Because of the tension inside Europe, part of Europe calls for help United States, first time in 1917, during the First World War. They called the second time, 1941, and for the Second World War, and they called on for a third time with the Cold War in 1947 with the NATO creation. And after that, United States never left, never gave up Europe, stayed here. So that's a parallel. It's not a comparison, but it's a kind of parallel I try to explain. That's the first part of my book. The second part is the analysis of the present situation concerning what happens now in European Union, on the European continent. And the question is this integration, is this union strong enough to resist to tensions, international tensions, domestic tensions, and so on? Is it strong enough to resist and to be able to have an independent vision, an independent development, an independent or sovereign capacity to be European and not American colony or Russian colony, let's say, why not? Or I don't know, Arabic colony or and that's the question I was asking for in the second part. And I examined three causes of problems, if I can say. The first one is a lack of democracy inside the European construction. European Union started in the 50s with the Treaty of Rome in 1957, but with economic goal. They said it was thought economy will be, if we enforce and we improve the economic cooperation, politics will follow. That was the main consideration for the founders of European Union. So let us make the economy strong and an economic integration, and politics will follow. But it is not the case, because European Union now is very strong economically speaking. That's a big success. We have to recognize it, and that's a fact. But politically speaking, it's not achieved. And it was done because it was economic. This foundation was founded on economic negotiations and not politics. So the people, the nations, the countries were not, the peoples of European nations were not associated to the building of the Union. It was kind of technocratic discussion between leaders, economic leaders, even political leaders, but not made by the people. And now you have the cost of that, and the cost is what is called the populist reaction. And the Gilets jaunes in France, or all this populist reaction, such as Hungary, Poland, it could be conservative or leftist, never mind. You have a kind of resistance of the people to this technocratic approach of European integration. It's new because it started after this millennium. It was not in the first 50 years, but now it's more or less growing, more or less stable. But anyway, in every country, you have this kind of resistance. The two second reasons, second cause, after the lack of democracy, let's say that, it's the institutional mess. Because in Europe, there is no a single Europe. You have 3-4 Europes. You have the Europe of defense with NATO, with 30 members, with United States and Canada. They have nothing to do with Europe, but they are in. So you have this Europe, which is very strong, very powerful, as we can say now with Ukraine conflict and Afghanistan invasion and everything, very strong. That's Europe. But against another part of Europe, I will come back after. You have the economic Europe, which is called the European Union, that's economy, okay? But it's not the same territory, because in the Europe Economical Union, you have 27 countries only, so there are still 8 or 10 countries which are not part of that. That's one. And you have also a kind of human rights Europe, that's the Conseil de l'Europe, Council of Europe, which is in charge of the human rights, the individual rights, and so on. Russia is member of this Europe. It's not quite different, but it's another type of Europe. You have the OSCE, yes, the Organization of Cooperation, which is different. So you have 4 or 5 systems which are not, which represent Europe, but not only European Union. You have other parts, and especially the military, which is not a European system because it's headed by United States. The commander-in-chief is in Washington, is not in Europe. So this kind of mess doesn't represent a chance, because the possibilities of tensions are very high. And thirdly, and I will stop there, the third cause, it's the internal tensions and international tensions. You have this will of unification, but in the meantime, this unification process excludes parts of Europe, such as Russia. Russia, it's a European power. It's more complicated, more complex, let's say, but it's a European power until two ones, and is the culture, the history of Russia, the writers, the musicians, everything is part of Europe. So if you try to build a continent without a very important part of this continent, it will bring tensions anyway. Even if it is another government in Russia, it doesn't matter about that. It will be communist, conservative, liberal, I don't know what. But anyway, if you exclude a very important part from the unification, it will bring tensions anyway. Second problem is the importance of Germany. That's an internal non-balance, because Germany is taking such an importance that it oversizes everything in Europe, because it's so strong now. It was counterbalanced by France. But as France is a little bit declining, now Germany is developing, as we can see with the last government of Olaf Scholz and his new foreign minister, Mrs. Baerbock. You know, Germany is self-assertive, is deciding, because this generation didn't live the collapse of Soviet Union. They didn't remember, such as the Christian Democrats. They have not the history of the reunification, because they were very young at that time, so they don't know this history. Angela Merkel, she knew, maybe she was not so cooperative, but she knew that. These people didn't, Mrs. Baerbock she didn't live that time. So she has not this historical view. And so Germany is so strong, it can unbalance all the continent, because if you have only one strong power and the other ones, put aside, it's not good. You have to have a balance in such a process with equal nation, with equal rights. So as we can, and the third one is the growing vassalization of Europe by United States. For me, what happened with Trump, because Trump was a little bit tightening the Europeans, especially NATO. And everybody thought, oh, with President Biden will change. It will not change a iota, not a centimeter, as we can say now. Because this process of vassalization, as I explained with former Greece, will stay. Because for America, it's non-thinkable to let Europe free, to let Europe to be sovereign, to be autonomous. Nowadays, it could happen, and I explained in the third part of my book how we could build a more independent, more sovereign European, and less independent. But I will stop here because I'm too long otherwise. So thank you for your attention, and yes, we can start.
Thank you very much. Applause, and thank you for the synoptic but quite comprehensive overview of all the important ideas that you espouse in the book. And I think this calls for both questions and comments. So whoever wishes to go first, we can sort of just please.
Should I just say it loudly this?
Well, I guess it's best if you come up here.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much that you decided to come. It was does it work? Can you hear me?
It should work, yeah.
Yeah, well, I really liked your presentation. However, there's some small parts that I expected a bit more solution to the problem. We had a great view of the history. I really loved the parallels between Greece and current European construction. Of course, I'm going to start with a bit of a controversial question because I think they're less, first of all, they're less boring than more traditional questions. And second time, I'm really interested to have the answer. And this will also address the Russian in the room. You mentioned the idea that Europe should collaborate and develop and have more cooperation. And I think we all agree with this. As a young politician, I am first young, and of course I would dream to travel from Lisbon to Moscow by train without showing a passport, or to see more cooperation between universities. But as a young politician, I'm also a politician, and I'm cold sometimes and pragmatic. And as I see, there's a bit of a weakening between relation between European Union, Switzerland, UK. It's not anymore EU and Russia. So my first provocative question is: what about Russians? Do they want to be more Europeans? Maybe they just don't want to be more Europeans. We all assume that they want a better cooperation, but what if they don't? So that's my first provocative question.
I cannot answer the question because it's you to answer the question. Well, I have the Russian passport too. I am also a Russian citizen. So I have a small.
That's why he asked this question.
Yeah, yes. As a Swiss Russian, yes, my heart is more balancing for European collaboration of Russia with the West. No, but for me, and I don't wish to repeat all the discussion inside Russia. If Russia is more, Slavic or European or Eastern Asia or Eurasia. Anyway, for me, Russia is Eurasiatic. It's both. There is one European leg and one, let's say, Siberian or Asian leg. It's two legs, which is good. It's better. But this European leg is to be used, and I think the collaboration, the cooperation, as we can say now in Ukraine or with the Nord Stream pipeline with Germany. So anyway, Russia he is part of Europe. For me, it's very clear, and has to cooperate. But the problem is, what do you do when parts or some states, European states, don't wish this collaboration, which is the case, or if yes, some states are making, how can I say, artificial tensions, creating artificial tensions in order to put or to let Russia aside. What can we do? We can try to do our best, but I am not able to answer more to this question. I hope it will happen, but it doesn't depend on me, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. I'm Yulia Nikitina. Sorry for being late. I listened to your presentation through our YouTube channel, so I have a question. Generally speaking, what you have told us would very please our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, because in 2016 he published an article on the historical foundations of Russian foreign policy. It was published on the Minister of Foreign Affairs website on the first page, and it was there for 3 years or more. And generally, and this article was exactly trying to prove that Russia is part of Europe, and he proved it through historical examples, saying that Russia has always participated in some conflicts and war with other European countries, but that's what exactly makes this space united, because we are united through all those processes. So generally speaking, we are here very pleased to know your position that you present in your book, but how many supporters do you have in other EU countries? Because generally speaking, to me, that's more an exceptional view, while the majority would say that Russia shouldn't be there. Russia does not have to participate in the EU security or in general European security architecture. So how do you prove to your colleagues in other European countries and Switzerland that Russia does have to be? Because Germany is an old threat. That's interesting, but probably not a very new argument. So how do you answer all those other criticisms? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So I have friends, but not enough to answer your question. No, I think there are parts of public opinion who disagree with the official policy. It could be in France, in Germany, everywhere. You have also parts of the economy, because the business is also normally open to cooperate with everybody. And I organized 10 days ago a conference with the former deputy chairman of Bank of Russia in Geneva. It was interesting because it was COVID time and hard times, and we get 40 businessmen for this lunch, which is quite good in the circumstances. So there is interest, but I have to say it's minority, it's not the majority. That's clear. But this minority thinking is still present, is still trying to be voicey, I write articles and, to stay alive, let's say. It's not easy because you have a bracket here, Russia's friend, and, this kind of thing on your front. But it's still possible to do it and to have also some press or some interest. But it's a struggle. It's not so easy. But let's try. In the history, if you look, you have always time where a minority is a minority, and after maybe I don't know how many years it could change, because the history you cannot exactly preview what can happen. What I think, I hope, but with the change of generation, also in Eastern Europe, because you had still now the post-Soviet political generation. So they have counts, they have revenge, not revenge, but But maybe, as you can see, for instance, Hungary was not so friendly with Russia, but it changed with President Orban. So it can change. This is an example of how a country which was not exactly friendly with Russia until a few years ago changed. Probably France could also help, because France is a little bit preoccupied by its decline. And the French tried always to cooperate with Germany. They spoke about the motor of Europe, the engine of Europe was French and Germans. But now, I'm not sure it will continue that, because Germany is so strong, as I told you. Germany can dominate everything. It's not in the interest of France to do that and to help to be the servant of Germany in Europe. And so it's possible that the French will maybe, hopefully, reconsider will not be against German, because they have to, but to try to have more space. And also, for instance, let's say, frankly, Ukraine. If Ukraine falls in the pockets, completely in the pockets of NATO, United States, and Germany, it will be a second Germany. It will be the factory, because that's the market, that's the natural market of Germany. Remember what said Hitler? Hitler, he said, we have to colonize Ukraine. It will be our wheat agriculture. We will kill half the Slavs. That was the speech of Hitler. Kill half the Slavs and the other half use as workforce for our factories. It's exactly what is doing Germany. With the extension of European Union in Eastern countries, all these countries are become the factories of Germany. It's peaceful, it's quiet, it's no bullet and anything, but it's exactly what happened. So if Ukraine, with 40 million people, with huge agricultural potential, is also falling in the German, let's say, US-German pockets, for the French, it is crazy to accept that without saying anything. So there is some signs that the French are a little bit thinking maybe to be more balanced. And in that respect, it could help to make the relations with Russia a little bit less tense. I'm maybe optimistic, but maybe if the French are not too stupid, they will think about that.
Thank you. So, Alekseeva.
I will do the next. Premièrement, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation et votre livre. Il est très intéressant et très pertinent. Et donc, j'ai une question. Dois-je poser en français?
Non, en français, ça va pour moi.
Oui. Alors,
surtout qu'elle parle bien français.
Merci. Alors, any state or state union is not only a territory, but it's also a mentality, a culture, and a type of thinking. In this regard, is there a special type of European thinking? If yes, then what's its essence? And in your opinion, what's the difference between European thinking and Russian thinking?
It's a difficult question to be frank. It's not easy. No, I think there is a background, an historical background. I explain, the tensions with the historical examples and so on, and also the possible divisions between Europeans, as I explained. But there are also common ground. That's for sure. I didn't mention because it was too short, but that's clear. This is the history of thinking, the philosophy, as you said, the music, everything, the arts, painting, and Christianity too, which is pretty important. Could be Roman Catholic or Protestant, but it's very important. And we have the common domestic wars, because wars are dividing. That's clear, as the revolution in Russia. It's dividing the country in two parts. But it's also a common history. It can also, when this step is behind, it can also bring, for instance, the French Revolution. It was a cause of division after the revolution, but now every French is proud of that. Maybe in Russia, in 1 century or in 50 years, every Russian could be proud of the revolution, not because of all the problems that people killed, but because it was kind of, event, common event, achievement, It's not maybe the case, it takes time, but for the French, it was exactly the same. You have the royalists, they kept the power until the 51st years of 18th century in France, and after change, but now, so this common culture is very important, and that's why also Russia is sharing this culture. For instance, in Switzerland, we have the Honorary Consul of Russia is in Lausanne and Geneva is organizing every week concerts, exhibitions, and so on of Russian culture. So it's living, the ballet, and all this kind of thing. It's playing a very important role. Also, the literature is, especially, even if now we don't read as much as before, literature is important. So there is also reasons to stay optimistic, even in such difficult times, in my view.
Thank you so much.
If I may just one comment, I love to tell my Russian friends that doubt or ask themselves if they're Russians, if they're more balanced towards Asia or Europe, etc. I generally ask them to try to think of 10 writers or philosophers from Europe, and most of the time it's easy to think of 10 writers or philosophers from Europe. And then I ask, can you name also 10 writers or philosophers from China? And for many Russians, it's much harder to name 10 philosophers from China. So for me, it's also an indication that there is a strong connection between the country. And also one more point about the current situation between, well, I see it as Swiss and Geneva. Yes, it's true that this morning I looked again at the Tribune de Genève that you used to be the president. And it's true that if you type Russia and you select the article, I would say the majority of the articles are a bit biased, not necessarily positive. But this is a relatively recent trend. 10, 15 years ago, it was not the case. So it's something that can change too. So it's not necessarily a fact. So I have hope. Well, that's and I believe you have a question.
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really very interesting, and I'm sure I will read the book if I manage to get it, of course.
I give one to Mr. Baykov for the library.
Thank you so much. Thank you. But I have a question which is connected with your presentation. You explained to us that Europe first was thinking about economics and then about politics, and was sure that sooner or later politics will follow. A typical Marxist point of view.
Yeah.
For the person of my generation, this is absolutely
That's right.
Maybe it's high time to a little bit to rethink Marxism from this point of view. Maybe politics is a little bit more important than economics. And let's change places. Is it possible, really, to develop, let's say, politics which will be built on, well, excuse me, I would like to say something else. There was a very interesting philosopher of the first part of the 20th century whose name was Martin Buber.
Yeah.
And he was writing a very interesting book which was called Me and You.
Mm-hmm.
And he was speaking about the dialogical attitude towards politics. It will help if we have a dialogue and not polemics.
Mm-hmm.
If we have polemics, it will fail. If we have dialogue, it may succeed sooner or later. And what else? You and me, it's possible that we find solution like France.
Mm-hmm.
But he also invented the term it, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that Russia is seen from Europe like something like it.
Mm-hmm.
A necessary thing, probably which sooner or later will help us to unite European countries, because it is different, because it's it. It is not, well, dialogical friend, if it's not possible to say. So from this point of view, my question is, how do you see Russia from the point of identity, European identity and Russian identity? European identity is more or less clear. What about Russian identity from your point of view?
It's also a difficult question for me because I am an artificial Russian, if I can say, because I'm not born here. I received the passport because I adopted a young Russian girl in the 90s. So I am Swiss born and I became a Russian citizen, but I was not, genetically speaking, or I don't know. And so this question of identity, it's difficult to answer if you are not.
But how you see it?
Yeah, no, for me, I see Russia as identity. I traveled a lot in Russia, in the Arctic, in the south, in the west, the east, and so on. For me, Russia is not a country, it's a continent. It's a continent, it's a world, it's a civilization. It's not only a country, because you have different religion, Orthodox, but you have also Muslim, you have the Boyat who are Buddhist. I was there, so everything is in Buddhist. So it's already different. And it's also geographically situated. It's not new, it's not a scoop. But as you are placed as Russia is, you are belonging to the two worlds, to Asia and Europe, as I said. So that's this double identity, which is the Russian identity, as well as Slavic, what we can Slavic, and European. And you have to tackle with them. But I think also, politically speaking, it's what now Russia is playing. I will not speak about Russian politics, but what for me, as I understand, it's exactly what happened with this new link with China. For me, Russian people have nothing to do with Chinese, to be frank. Because in the history, it was more competing and there was no big links. But now, it's also something new for Russian politics to have this link, and it has to be developed. Because for me, it's a question of balancing. I believe to the balance of power. I don't believe to the hegemonical power. Now it's United States, but let's say if it was Russian hegemony, I would be against that. You see. So for me, it's important in humankind, humanity, to have balanced, to have multi-civilization. You cannot have only one civilization, only the Anglo-Saxon English-speaking civilization. That's the death of humanity, in my view. We need that. Like the nature likes diversity. There is diversity of species, fishes, animals, plants. You cannot one single plant. So that's the same for the human beings. And for me, it's important that Russia plays the role of a balancing power between the now confrontation between United States, the growing confrontation between United States and China. And this is important to play. I would hope that Europe could play this balancing role. But as far as I explained, Europe is not able to play this balancing role between United States and China. Probably Russia is in a better situation due to its geographical position, to its thinking, to his mind to play this role. And there are signs that United States is maybe starting to think about that. Because the two last meetings in Geneva between Biden and Putin in June this year, and the second meeting last week, it's quite new in that format, with not big achievements, but not collapse too, because when Putin met Trump in Finland, it was a failure. So there is some signs showing that maybe United States is recognizing the role of, let's say, not arbitration, because I think it's the wrong term, but it's balancing or counterbalancing, because Russia cannot be too much linked with China, as Russia cannot be too linked, because otherwise it will be subservient of China, as the European Union is vis-à-vis the United States. So to stay an independent sovereign power, Russia has also to balance, has to be closer of China, but has also to be close or not too much far from Europe. Otherwise, you are attracted, and that's not good, not only for Russia, but I mean for the whole world. It's important to keep, independent. And it's also interesting to notice that in Africa, Africa is the lost continent. But the growing playing field of Russia in Africa, which is new, it was Syria, but now Central Africa, Mali, and Africa. I was former president of the Swiss African Chamber of Commerce before us. So I traveled to Africa. But now my African friends, they are looking on Russia. And they are hoping that Russia will play a bigger role in Africa, because they need in Africa to have a balancing power between the former colonialists, like France or Britain, also to play a counterbalancing role between United States and China, even in Africa. So I was surprised. It's quite new, but now you can hear a voice there, waiting for some more stronger Russian, not meddling, but Russian cooperation, partnership. Interesting. We need balancing power.
Okay, yes, we have a question from Professor Zonova, who's connected online.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, very well.
Oh, thank you. Professor, I thank you very much of your so topical book, as well your other very interesting and stimulated books. And the same we can say about our discussion today. Probably I'm more optimistic. I don't think Europe is going to collapse, but for Russia, I suppose it's very important what direction Europe will choose to follow. Direction of Russophobia or direction for dialogue with Russia. In our university, I teach problems of Italy. So I want to know that the Italians treat Russia with sufficient, I suppose, understanding. And they used to call Russia a strategic partner. And they constantly say that sanctions won't solve the problem. And they try to count automatic prolongation of sanctions by the European Union. And I would like only to remember the words by Matteo Renzi, former Prime Minister, words he said at Humboldt University in Berlin in 2015. He said, "Some Eastern countries consider Europe as a permanent counterposition to Russia. It is," he said, a short-sighted position and a false against history. It's a political mistake and a crime against culture. So I cited his words. And really, the Italians are in favor of dialogue with Russia. But my personal opinion is that such a dialogue must also include the recognition of some mistakes made also by our country. For example, I suppose we should abandon pure propaganda and recognize some of our false steps, because our propagandistic insistence, for example, if you see our TV channel, something on such channels, so such insistence on the irreversible decay of Europe, I think we can't admit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So no question.
I've got one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So okay, I will speak English, so everyone can understand.
Introduce yourself, please.
Sasha Pazano, first class IMO, SGI University. So first of all, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I've got a question about the European Union. Do you think that they have to take big measures, big decisions against the countries who supported the United States, like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, and Finland, who are more allies with the United States than European countries? So do you think that they have the European Union to take decisions and measures against them, to be more neutral and to be less on the American influence?
Thanks for the question. I don't think so, because in the decision making inside the European Union, you know, every country has a right of veto. So these countries, they can oppose everything, you know, and they are pretty strong. With Poland, and as you have seen, this new alliance between, yes, Finland and Baltic, Poland, Croatia. You know, it was the former historical big Polish Lithuanian alliance. You know, that's a rebuilding of this kind of thing. So they are pretty strong, and in my view, too strong to force to oppose, you know, inside Europe. But now these countries have been completely free to impose their agenda to the other ones, as Italy and you know. Spain, the Latin countries, France, and so on. Now, as I say with France, for instance, and maybe with Italy, which could help, because the Italians, I wrote this book on Russophobia 5 years ago. The Italian people, they are the less Russophobic peoples in Europe, in fact, the Italians. Because with the old Venetian, they always cooperate with the Byzantine Empire, you know, and Italian, they have no prejudices against Russia. It's not a hazard if Fiat has built the first motor car company during Soviet times, Togliatti Grad. It's not a hazard. I know the founder. The daughter is living in Geneva, and my publisher, Mr. De Palen, who was the director of Fiat in Russia. So his wife is Agnelli, founding family of Fiat. So Italians are the less Russophobic. So now the present government is without hope, but it could change. No, with Draghi, because Draghi is completely, so European former banker and completely IMF, World Bank, and Washington institution oriented. So it's without hope, but it can change, as I told. So we have seen with Berlusconi 15 years ago, it was not bad. So I think there are also some signs inside Europe to tackle with, let's say, the Polish-Baltic value.
Yes. Okay, any other questions, please? So many.
Okay, another question. Like Tatiana said, I'm the director of surveillance and volunteers. So thank you for the presentation of the book, and also thank you for all the previous questions. It appears that it seems like before strategy, thinking about strategy or operational to ally a partner, it seems that we need to know our identity, and that's why the question about identity. What is the identity of Russia? Right? Is the identity of Europe? If we don't know our own identity, we cannot we cannot ally our development success to the others. So I would like to have your opinion.
Yeah, no, that's quite important. Identity is for sure very important, because if you don't know who you are, you cannot do anything. That's really clear. And in that respect, I think Russia has its word to give. Let's say, if you see the recent trends in Europe coming from United States, for instance, this wokist movement, this LGBT, I don't know in Russia, or this sexual identity movement, which is now coming into with the gay, lesbian, and so on, which is completely now coming inside the European universities. Now the big question in our university is not the science, is if we have to build a toilet for transgender people. That's the main question now. I don't speak about that, but it's completely crazy. If you look from a little, maybe it's a question. It can be a question, no problem. Everybody is free. It could be a question, but let's say if the science and the university and the academic world is only focused on that kind of issues, I don't see a big result. So identity is a help, but this kind of identity research or identity quest, is becoming so ridiculous. It could also be destroying, So we have to pay attention about that. But Russia, for me, is more aware, is more normal, if I can say, is more, what can I say? Russia doesn't lose its time to such questions, if I can say, which is good for me. I don't think we have to be too much conservative, but we cannot be too much progressive or societalist. I call them there are no more socialists, there are societalists. That's another. It's called what I call the liberal progressist ideology. And it has to be also counterbalanced.
Okay, we have a question from Alexander Konkov, who's online with us.
Yes, hello. Dear Mr. Mettan, Monsieur Mettan, I'm very happy to be with you here. I'm from the other university. I'm from Moscow State University, associate professor. But I do I want to express my gratitude to organizers for the opportunity to take part in this event today. As far as your books have always been in time as your previous one, the book on La Guerre 2001, which was seems to me around 5 years ago, translated into Russian as well, and it was distributed. I remember in St. Petersburg, around participants of St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and you know, at that time that was a big so many doubts on the future dialogue, as well as doubts we have at the moment, doubts on the future dialogue between West and Russia. So many talks, and your book was really in time as far as it could demonstrate to us that there is other West, there is some historical view on the problems we did have. So I look forward to reading your new book, and I'm sure it's quite important in all those changes and all those challenges we're facing at the moment. But I would like to ask you a question concerning some geographical points. You know, we had all those usual discussions on whether Russia is Europe or Russia is Asia. And several years ago, when President Putin was asked about that, he was joking a bit, saying that Russia never ends. So Russia doesn't end in Europe or in Asia or even in America, as far as we know about some Russian history in America, in Africa, as far as greatest Russian poet, the founder of Russian, modern Russian language, Alexander Pushkin, had African roots. So Russia never ends, and that was a kind of discussion again on that, whether Russia has boundaries in Europe, in Asia, or between Russia or between Europe and Asia. So my question to you is, how do you think where Europe, where does Europe end? Indeed, as far as still many talks on again geographical points, political points, cultural points, like for example. Maybe wouldn't be a good quotation for today's meeting, but just the previous Saturday, Polish Prime Minister said that Russia should decide whether it is with Europe or against Europe. So you know, it's such a bizarre and it's such a bizarre notion concerning the geographical boundaries for Russia, which has always been both in Europe and in Asia. So my question again to you is, how do you think whether Europe is, where does Europe end? Whether it ends, for example, in Moscow, in Yekaterinburg, in Vladivostok, or it ends, for example, in Istanbul, in Warsaw, or in Kiev maybe. So what's your opinion on modern geographical boundaries of Europe as a continent, as a part of the world, as a part of political life? So what's your opinion? Thank you again.
Thank you for the question. No, Europe, you know, never ended during 4 centuries. But now I think Europe is ending. And because the Occidentalization, the Westernization, so the Europeanization of the world now is finishing. And that's the problem for the European continent, and especially for France, to accept it. Because until the Second World War, it was the case. Now, America has become the hegemonical power, so-called, and Europe has a lot of pain to recognize that fact. But it is the case. If you travel, and I am traveling a lot, it's very surprising to notice how the people outside Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, India, Vietnam, and so on, they are now taking distance with Europe. But Europe stays the first economic power. If the consolidated Europe as a consolidated, it comes before United States in terms of GDP or economic, strongness. But it's unable to use it, not as a political tool, but as a way or as an instrument to have its own sovereign policy. And for me, normally, the destiny of Europe is what I mentioned in the book, the normal destiny of Europe, because it's unified with many cultures, nations, and so on. It's a federation, in fact. To be a federation with a so strong economic potential, normally the destiny of that continent is to be, yes, as I told for Russia, a counterbalance, an arbiter, between United States and China, in order to bring peace in the world. Because if you have only two camps fighting against them, it will be a war. After that, I don't know when, but if you have only two camps on this planet, it will end by a war. That's not possible to avoid that. If you have a third player or fourth player, important, strong enough to tell you, if you do that, I will, make an alliance and so on. It will help to lower the tensions. Normally, this is the role of Europe, but according to the last circumstances, I don't see this role for now, because Europe is unable to play because of what we have speaking, with the US grip on Baltic, Poland, and Ukraine, and so on, trying to divide. Remember the book of Zbigniew Brzezinski. He told in his book, that's the clear agenda of the United States. He wrote the book in 1995, The Great Chessboard, that's the name of the book. And that was the agenda of the neoconservative in Washington. They are still in power with Joe Biden. The goal of United States is to divide Russia in three parts, Siberia, Middle, and European parts. So to divide, to break Russia. And Ukraine is we have to get Ukraine in order to put ahead our agenda. It's always the case in Washington. It's changing a little bit now because this strategy was not successful. It's not exactly as successful as they hoped, but still behind, And normally the European should be aware of that, but unfortunately not enough to play their own play.
Okay, we have a few questions in the back. Yeah, so let's make them brief.
May I ask my question? I'm a fourth year student of SGI, and I would like to go back to your presentation of the book. In the book, you mentioned that Europe should seek relative strategic autonomy from the US and try to find a new approach with Russia. But however, speaking in realist terms, right now, for the balance of power in Europe, US is the only guarantee of this realistic balance of power. The nuclear potential of US and US Army was the only assurance of a breakthrough between Europe and Russia. So, as you said about balance of power and all the stuff, where do you see this new strategic autonomy of Europe under the framework of seeking balance of power in Europe?
No, for me, one piece is to have European defense. Even if it is not so strong as the US army or the Chinese army, it doesn't matter. It has to be strong enough to support an independent strategic thinking and foreign policy. With nuclear nukes, you don't need to have thousands of nukes. You can have some hundreds, let's say. But the first step is to have an independent army, an independent defense force, which is not the case. The French are trying to push the idea of European defense, but it's so difficult due to the United States pressure. But it's the first step. Without this step, nothing will happen. Otherwise, the Finnish will buy the F-35, as did the Swiss, in my regret. Switzerland should buy the French Rafale, maybe a Sukhoi or a MiG, but let's say at least a Rafale, because it will help Switzerland to have a better defense with his ally, with his close ally, not far ally as the United States, 8,000 kilometers from Switzerland, which is completely, for me, stupid. It's not a question of techniques, it's a question of strategy. But now, as we can say, the Finland has bought F-35, didn't buy a European jet or a French one. So, unfortunately, if there is no defense, no European defense, it will be hard for Europe to become independent and autonomous and so on. But a second type is, and that's the end of my book, just a word, is to build a more democratic Europe. And I gave the example of Switzerland. You know, after the Napoleonic War, when Napoleon was defeated by Russian army in 1814, and after the Vienna Treaty in 1815, Switzerland was in the same situation as Europe now, inside Europe. There were big powers and small Switzerland in the middle of Europe. And what they did, and every big power tried to get in, to meddle in the Swiss politics. The French, the German, the Austrian Empire tried to get in and to make pressures on Swiss to be on their camp. Exactly like what happened now with the United States, Russia, and so on. And what did the Swiss? They built a democratic way with direct democracy, with the vote, in order to build their self-independence. The first vote in Switzerland was for the color of the military uniforms. In 1830, 34, something like that. Because it was not the color of uniform which was important, because it could be red, blue, or anything. But voting for that, it was the sign to build an autonomous defense army, not submitted to France, to German or Austrian. That was the deal. And the majority of Swiss, they vote for the, let's say, the red uniform. But doing that, it was impossible for these foreign powers to meddle in Swiss politics. So through democratic concessions to the peoples, because it was the richest people who had the power, but they accepted to share a little bit power with the peoples of Switzerland, giving them some rights to vote. They vote for an independent army. It was the first conquest. And due to that, it was very difficult for foreign powers to meddle, because it was people's support, not only technocratic, elites decision, but democratic. And it's a way for Europe to rebuild its own independence, to give the power to the peoples, to trust them, to give them the opportunity to take decision, sometimes wrong, sometimes right, that's the game, but giving that step by step to rebuild its own independence. As it is democratic, the big US democracy cannot say anything. It was democratic vote. So if Europeans decide to build their own army, what can say without NATO? What can US say? It's democracy. That's an example how Europe could overcome this challenge.
Yeah. Okay, please pass on the microphone to the next.
Hello, thank you for your speech. My name is Nikitina. I'm a student of the School of Governance and Politics. And my question is about one thing. You're a politician and you're a very good speaker, as I mentioned. So could you please give us advice how to convince your opponents, how to convey your thoughts correctly? Thank you.
How to convey your thoughts and convince opponents.
Ooh la la. If I know it. Yes. No, thanks for the question, but possible to answer, because if I had the question, I will do it, No. Yes, for me, it's a step by step. It's, always writing, explaining, making conference, and trying to convince. But we are like the old monks, the old monks in the ancient time. They were walking in the street or in the forest to bring the lights of Christianity. But they were alone. It was dark, snowy, but they came to success. So we are like that, with a small light. Yeah.
Okay, next question, please.
My name is Quinn. I'm a visiting student from New York. Thank you, Mr. Mettan. I thought your presentation was informative and understandable, which I know can be a task sometimes itself. My question is related to the question the young man asked previously. How do you think migration into Europe affects this idea of a direct democracy? Because if you have someone, say, Indian or Pakistani people in London, England, or Algerian or Moroccan, France, these people might have, you as well as me might value their diversity, but that also means a great difference in their opinions and views. How do you think that would affect that direct democracy, where maybe back in Switzerland they might have been differences between European peoples, but less difference per se, someone in Europe, Asia, or Middle East?
Mm-hmm. I think now we live in globalization and migrations that they were always part of the history. It's not new, the migration. So we have to tackle it for Russia too, because if you have Tajik workforces here, it could be different. Yeah. So it's a global problem. But democracy could help and could stop. For instance, in Switzerland, we have 2 votes against, let's say, against with brackets, migrants. We have the minaret vote. The minaret is the Muslim thing, yeah. And recently we have, maybe Mr. Chair, you know that, we have also a vote not in favor of migrants. But I think that's the right of people to decide that. So for me, it must be democratically decided if we accept migrants or not. It has been to be discussed. Otherwise, you will get big problems, as we can see. And Europe, it's also now, until now, a big collapse of European Union. This incapacity to tackle with the migration problem. You have the Calais, between the Calais in France, problem between French and British, with the migrants in French trying to go to British. You have the Belarus-Polish problem now with the migrants. You have in Greece the Lesbos island with concentration camps of migrants. You have all these dozens and hundreds of migrants dying in the Mediterranean Sea. So it's a civilizational collapse, because if you let the migrants die, where is humanity in that? So we cannot say as Europeans, we are the light of civilization and let the people die on one way. On the other way, you cannot accept everybody, otherwise you have millions of people and there will be civil war between the guys. So for me, democratic decision is the best one, because the people are maybe egoistic, but they can accept a certain part of migrants because you need them. It's not too good to be completely close. So, but it has to be also tackled democratically and not technocratically, in my view.
Yeah, how many questions more do we have? So that I have this impression.
Can I also
wait. Yeah. How many questions? Raise your hands, everyone who wants to ask questions. Two questions. Two questions. Okay.
Sorry. So, as you have touched the subject of migration, and especially you have named Poland, also, and
use the mic, please, for the Zoom.
Yes, and so you have already mentioned Poland and the concept of migration. You mentioned Hungary. So, what, in your opinion, are the prospects of Eastern European countries, such as, for example, Poland or Hungary, those who have chosen a more conservative approach? So, unlike many Western European countries, where, as you have mentioned, the scientific questions are nowadays not as important as laboratories for people with certain problems in their gender orientation. What do you think are the prospects of them somehow playing a more important role in Europe's political, social, or cultural life? Victor, for instance, second year, Faculty of International Relations.
For the migrants or migrants, I think we have to accept certain migrants, a certain part of migration, as I told, because a country cannot be completely closed. It's not good. But not in every condition, not at every condition, and with due respect with the people of the nation, with due respect of the people. That's very important, and with their support. And if you look of Poland, of Bulgaria, or even the Baltic countries, they have a bizarre attitude because they lost 20% of their population migrating to Great Britain, to France, to Germany for working. I was in Bulgaria last year or 2 years ago. They lost 20 or 25% of their population. and Romania, not so much, a little bit less, but even Poland, you know, the Polish workers in Great Britain. So these guys, they don't want to accept migrants at the Belarus border, but they send migrants to Germany or to Britain. It's a little bit bizarre, you know. You have to be coherent. If you accept your migrant going to Germany, you have maybe to be a little bit more open. When I say that, I don't see to be fully open, you know, because you have to, yes, to respect your own people. So it's completely contradictory. And especially for the Europeans who are giving lessons of morale, of human rights to the whole herd, you know, that's for me big incoherence. So it's not migration, it's very complicated, but you can give the morale to the others and not respecting for yourself. It's just part of your answer. It's a theme in itself. Yeah.
Yes, honestly, I would admit that it's truly a serious problem. So, for example, regarding Hungary, there was...
I'm sorry, can we continue in a more informal setting afterwards?
Sorry.
Okay, we will speak after. Yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, we can. No problem. Otherwise, we can take 1 hour to speak.
Just those who are watching us cannot hear you.
Yes, I apologize for being a little bit too eager to participate in the discussion.
Eagerness is good. Eagerness is good, but not too much. Yes, please.
Bonjour, Mr. Mikhail. Thank you so much for your fascinating speech. Actually, I have a question concerning Russia again. I've been living in Europe for 10 years, and I know the problems with both sides, usually. So nowadays, Europe tends to forget about Russian achievements, for example, in World War II, or, for example, Russia, the Soviet Union was one of the countries that established the United Nations. And nowadays, the Europeans only think of Russia as being as aggressor in, I don't know, Cold War, in Afghan War, in Ukraine conflicts. So what do you think? Why are all these achievements are being forgotten?
No, because you are completely right, you know. As a French-speaking Swiss, I was fascinated by the storytelling of the Second World War by France. Because if you look the French storytelling now, you can believe then that the Second World War was achieved with the debarkment, the landing of 6 June 1944. Now that's the only story you can hear about Second World War. But as I am a little bit older than you know, I knew some French anciens combattants, old, you know, and these people, when they landed in Normandy in 1944, they exactly knew, the French, British, American soldiers in Normandy, they knew that they were successful in the landing because of the Red Army combating in the East. Because when 50,000 soldiers died in Normandy in June 1944, 150 Russian soldiers died at the same time for stopping Hitler to put his panzer, displacing his panzer from Eastern Front to Normandy to fight against the landing, to fix the panzer in the East, you know. That's why they were successful. Every soldier, American doesn't mind, they know that. Now it's completely forgotten that. Because of what? Because of propaganda. There is not a new Cold War, but there is a disinformation campaign since decades now, since 30 years now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, saying if Nazis were beaten, it's because of us, not because of Russia. So you have how many American soldiers died during the Second World War? 200,000 in Europe, 200,000 in the Pacific. How many Russian soldiers or Soviet soldiers? 25 million. But who cares? Nobody in the Western world. So that's the propagandistic and the revisionist history, rewriting of history, slowly. It was a scandal. I was scandalized when they celebrated the 75th anniversary of Normandy landing in 2019, and they didn't invite Russia. It was a scandal, even for the surviving, because they knew that.
Okay, so our time is up, but I think it's been a very well spent time. I recently learned a very interesting definition of happiness. You're happy when people understand you and when they believe in you. We've been really happy during this session because you understand Russian very well, much better than most, I would say. And you believe in us, in our faith, and in the future of our cooperation with Europe. Because we obviously see our future in alignment with Europe. Maybe not formal, maybe not as something as institutionally solid as the European Union is, but definitely working for the same cause, trying to accomplish the same ends. And obviously, thank you for the books that you always bring to us and to our library, and for the insights. I'm sure we all enjoyed the insights and the answers to the questions. Thank you to all the students for showing interest. Thank you to the professors for being keen discussants in this event. And you're always welcome at MGIMO, so please come back whenever you can. Okay. Please join me in thanking Monsieur Guy Mettan for his wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Спасибо большое.
Да, можно выписать.
So, Andrey, thanks a lot. It was, I hope, not too bad.
Oh, I'm learning your concept. This is part of my research area as well. My thesis was in new inspiration in comparison with Pascal.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Questions of identity. Finding out why they are following so different paths.
Yeah, I interested. Maybe the book can give you some insights.
Yes, I've looked through the content. Certainly comprehensive.
Yeah, quite, yes. Okay, so good luck.
J'étais